Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 3 of Building Union as we answer these 3 important questions. Again, I'm Dan McCrory, co-host for the Building Union 3-day challenge. And here is my co-host.
Terry Haley, good morning.
We want to answer these important questions as we continue on. What do unions do right? What do unions do wrong? And how can we adapt for the future? The third question may be the most important. The labor movement may very well save the middle class from the pillaging and theft from the 1%. But first, we have to wrestle our power back. The National Labor Relations Act was meant to put us on more level footing with our corporate overseers. But FDR was hardly in his grave when they subverted most of what we had won with the Taft-Hartley Act. Now we had to worry about our survival from the right to work clause. Employees could become freeloaders, never paying dues while enjoying the union's successes at the bargaining table. It's a way to starve a union to death so they're no longer able or they're handling your grievances, taking them to arbitration, making sure that health and safety regulations are adhered to, and yes, bargaining your contract. What tools have we used in the past that would work well for us in the future, and which should we discard?
Well, I really don't. I think that we should make all tools that labor has used over the decades, the generations, and the centuries available. Certain things that looked as if they were obsolete, for example, the recognition strike, which was hugely important in the post NLRA period, makes a comeback in the 90s and the early 2000s with, for example, campaigns like Justice for Janitors, and an understanding that using National Labor Relations Board certification elections became a tool for management, for employers to delay and ultimately thwart the union organizing. So that's one example of something that was used in the past that seemed to sort of go out of disfavor and then came back in a strong way. Another example would be what I guess is often called wildcat strikes, right? So the wildcat strikes are sort of unauthorized concerted activity, right? And maybe that has a place now in modern militant unionism because the labor movement is in such a fix in terms of our inability to grow that why not take advantage of whatever's worked in the past.
You recommend going back to doing things that are possibly illegal in the eyes of the law?
Well, so this question of legality is kind of interesting because I'm not sure it's always as much a question of legality is consequences. I had an experience a while ago in which there was an attorney present in a strategy session being held by a major union in a campaign. And the attorney kept saying to the union decision makers, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. And finally, a good friend of mine who was chief negotiator said to the union lawyer, your job is not to tell us what we can and can't do. Your job is to tell us the potential legal consequences of what we do. But given, you see what I mean? So given the state that organized labor is in, I'm not proposing that we do things illegally, but should we do things to circumvent, for example, the restrictions imposed by National Labor Relations Board decisions? Well, that certainly is up to the individual organizations.
Okay. So what about things like sit-down strikes? Would you recommend something like that?
You know, the sit-down strike in Flint in the 30s was an epic moment in American industrial unionism, and the fact that the UAW was able to break through and organize GM could have been the most important single victory that unions had in industrial unionism in the 30s. So could a sit down strike work under current circumstances? I don't know. It's hard to assess what can work and what can't work until somebody tries it.
Well, what I found is that a lot of jobs are customer service based now, and they can go from, let's say, California to Texas at the flip of a switch. And if you're sitting there in front of the switch, not letting anybody near it, then that constitutes, I guess, a sit-down strike and can be effective.
And it's
Yeah.
not really, Lou, just from California to Texas. It's from California to India, California to the Caribbean, California to basically anywhere.
That's a really good point. And I might be so much kind of tied to older generation thinking that I don't have a quick I don't quickly go to that kind of thinking, but certainly young organizers, dedicated, strategically sophisticated organizers are beginning to sort of understand some of the ways in which unions can adjust to current technical circumstances and conditions. I mean, I'll give you an example. You want an example?
Sure, please.
So now this is like announcing it to the outside world, but because of the coronavirus, the negotiations between my union, which is the AFT Community College Guild, and management has gone on to Zoom conference format, right? And so we're sitting at a virtual table across from management. One of the ways in which our organizers have made use of this is the agreement. The initial agreement was that faculty observers would be allowed into the room, and we were doing face-to-face bargaining. And so we would have maybe 15 or 20 or 25 faculty sort of stop by and sit around the perimeter of the negotiating table and watch negotiations. Well, now that it's on a Zoom conference format, we've actually had as many as 400 members sitting in on negotiations. And it's been a really effective adaptation by our organizers to new technology. And it freaks out the employer too, to have, they know there are several hundred faculty witnessing the transactions at the bargaining table. It's good. It actually turned out to be much to our advantage.
Are you worried about strategy meetings that due to Zoom's public presence, management might be able to kind of scoop what you're planning?
I think I see. This is interesting too, because I'll stay with this negotiations between the community college, the LA Community College District, and the Faculty Guild. And the way it works is that we're in a joint, and I'm not the best person to use the technological jargon, but we're in kind of a large conference in which labor and management are discussing the articles in the contract proposal. And there's an outer shell of observers. And then when we need to caucus, and all about that process, we actually leave that site and we go to our own site, and our chairs are able to just make sure that whoever comes into the caucus is not a spy from the other side, or likewise. And we wouldn't corrupt the system. And in fact, I'll give management credit. Management at the community college district would not corrupt the system by trying to spy on our caucuses. Is it complete? Are we completely safe, however, from any potential hackers who would come into our? Of course we're not, but we're doing our best, and because we have a basically good faith relationship with the employer, the Zoom format for bargaining seems to be working.
What other tools, since you are a labor historian, do you think we should be using that we're not utilizing, or maybe some things that we need to stop doing?
You know, there was a good book, and I wish I could remember. It was written by a Chicago labor attorney about 7 years ago, and it was called like A Return to the Strike or something. And I mean, I think it would be legitimate to bring strikes back into the mix when possible. But on the other hand, you have to recognize the reality of worker circumstances and also be aware of the true power relations between the employers and unions nowadays. So I wouldn't be one to go out and in a blanket way advocate that there be more strikes, because I know what a strike does to people's lives, and I know the risks that workers are taking, and I know the employer's tools to, and you and I well know that employers in under NLRA have the authority to not just replace strikers, but to permanently replace strikers. We tried legislation in the 90s, and we couldn't get it. We couldn't get it through Senate filibuster to actually outlaw permanent replacement of strikers. So I'm not one to kind of be pie in the sky about what union tactics and strategies could work and couldn't work. In fact, I think it was sobering the past 20 years or so, past 30 years, in which many people, from the who had experience in radical political movements, in fact, became leadership of major unions, and some of those major unions were successful in some of their campaigns and not successful in others. So it's not as if it's the lack of imagination on the part of unions that continues to, in which we continue to see the steady decline in the percent of workers represented by unions. It's not that we haven't tried different things. We have, but the National Labor Relations Act, as we know, is kind of was very much stacked in favor of the employer. And I am enthusiastic about recognition strikes when possible and when appropriate in the industry. For example, the Film and Television Crew Production Union, the IATSE, uses recognition strikes simply because the employers, change rather quickly. So you have a window of maybe 2 months in which the producer is shooting, and you can use a recognition strike if you can pull the workers from the crew, because each hour and each day that the producer's not able to shoot is real money. And so recognition strikes by the film and television crew unions have been relatively effective over the past 10 or 15 years because of the specific circumstances of the employer-employee relationships.
Lou, for those who aren't familiar with a recognition strike is, could you elaborate a little bit?
Sure, it's where you don't use the National Labor Relations Board certification election process, which is usually a two-step process. One in which representation cards are collected by members and then submitted to the National Labor Relations Board, and the board then sets an election date and supervises a secret ballot election, a majority vote election on certification. And what we've seen over the past generation or two is the employer's tendency and ability to just delay the process whereby there could be like a year gap between when the representation cards are submitted and the election finally takes place. And during that time, the employer could use all sorts of tactics and methods to freak out the employees and to use all sorts of union busting consultants and others to convince the workers that that union representation would not be worth the effort. And then once certification is achieved, then there's another cycle that goes into place, which of course is contract bargaining. And contract bargaining is another opportunity for the employer to thwart and delay. So what a recognition strike basically does is it says here's the industry standard contract, Mr. Employer or Ms. Employer, and we're going to hit you hard. And the way to stop it is to both recognize the union and agree to the industry standard terms in this contract, which we're handing over to you right now. Sign the contract, and everybody goes back to work. So the recognition strike is in fact a pretty good tactic when applicable.
Okay, would you sort of tie that into something we know as pattern bargaining?
Pattern bargaining it was very, very big in the 1960s and 1970s, in which for example, the UAW would target one of the big three American automakers and then negotiate a particular agreement regarding wages, benefits, and working conditions, and then use that as a template in its negotiations with the other employers. But see, that was more used during a period when there wasn't, number one, as many foreign automakers, and two, when the UAW had tremendous union density, which it no longer has, including the fact that the UAW can't seem to win a representation election in the U.S. Even when the car company is neutral during the campaign. So pattern bargaining, I think, really kind of depends on pre-existing union density, which for the most part now unions don't have and doesn't exist in most industries in the U.S. with private sector unionization down to less than 10% of the workforce.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. You mentioned something about UAW not being able to win elections. Why do you think that is?
Because I think, and I'm not going to fault the UAW, but particularly in some of the southern states, the culture in the southern states has always been, starting before right to work in 1947, the southern states were always the leading region in terms of anti-unionism. And there's a culture of subordination in the South that I feel is a continuation of the era of segregation and discrimination. Right, but right to work now is no longer simply a southern state phenomenon, as we know, and right to work has triumphed in big parts of the Midwest, and Republican legislators, will do right to, if there's a Republican majority in the state legislature and a Republican governor, one of the first things they'll do is right to work. And then, of course, the Janus decision, which applies to public sector workers, is in fact imposing a right to work structure on all public sector employees in the U.S.
How do we win hearts and minds of the middle class in order to grow the union?
It's a good question, and it's a complicated question, because to this day, with all the problems that unions have had in terms of messaging and image. To this day, if you simply ask American workers if they would join a union if they could, you'll still get a majority yes, because workers recognize that that when you work union, you're making more money and you're much more likely to be to have the advantages of pension and medical benefits. American workers understand that and answer the question, sure, I'd be in a union if I could. Um, the issue is not around worker willingness to be in a union, it's around the intensity allowed under American labor law and practice of employer resistance and employer intimidation and employer delays and employer threats and on occasion employers using illegal methods to intimidate and scare workers, including kind of getting rid of the union agitators, even though they might be reinstated 6 or 8 months later after a National Labor Relations Board rep does a review. The damage is done. The message has been sent to workers that you might want a union, but the risks and the costs of getting it are not worth it. So can we get major labor law reform? And that's been on the labor movement's agenda for as long as I've been involved with unions. Our last shot was the what was it called in the when we introduced it under Obama? The come on, what was it? What was it called?
Employee Free Choice Act?
Yeah, the free choice. That's right. And we got it passed in the House, and we couldn't get it through the Senate filibuster rules. That was our last shot.
I actually had some concern about that particular piece of legislation anyway, because I was afraid that it gave free run for unions to raid each other.
Well, it might have not been perfect, but at least it was, to me, at least it was an effort to address the bias within NLRA, and we couldn't get that. And one of the problems, I think, is as we know, when it's a long time already now, when the Obama administration came in and the president at the time said that, well, you know, I'm interested in labor law reform, but I got 2 things I got to do first. I got to do the stimulus package because it was on the heels of the 2008 recession, and I got to do the Affordable Care Act. And by the time it really came into view, the Free Choice Employee Free Choice Act, that's what it's called, right? Yeah, that's right. EFCA. All the oxygen had been taken out of Obama's initiatives. So, you know, it's not the only answer, but certainly labor law reform could help. We'll see what happens in the next generation to the extent to which there's kind of an insurgent movement among the younger generation toward a recognition that employers and corporations and financial institutions that the deck is stacked, and that the wealth continues to be concentrated more and more in the hands of fewer and fewer, as you well know, and will in fact American workers of all sorts, including gig workers and tech workers, kind of recognize that there has to be a shift in power relations in order for that dynamic to change. And will it happen? Well, there's signs that it might.
So COVID-19 has really thrown a monkey wrench in the works, and we may be facing employers who say you're lucky to still have a job if you have one. So do you see that having everlasting effects, or is it going to be a short transition and then we're back to normal? whatever normal is.
Well, all I know is that there's always a kind of a way of analyzing economic conditions and what's more favorable to unionization. Is it a time when the economy is productive, and by that I don't mean in which the wealth is being shared very well, but in which employment figures tend to be kind of low, or is organizing workers easier during times when there's more overt desperation among wage earners. I can't settle that one way or the other. It seems to me that most importantly now is a general temperament among workers that the deck is really stacked against them, and whether or not political institutions like labor are able to or will be able to respond meaningfully to that sentiment on the part of those who are not part of the asset wealth class. And I don't have the answer to it, although there's some relatively hopeful signs, I think, among the younger generation of workers in particular.
So are we going to be able to survive, much less thrive?
Well, unions within certain regions and certain sectors are going to survive. If you look at California, in which the political climate is generally more favorable to unions, largely because unions have been very successfully engaged in political action and have a lot of alliances among Democrats in both the legislature, at the top of state governments, and in lots of city councils and boards of supervisors and so on. So unions in California are a major political player, and that helps maintain an atmosphere in which unions can thrive. It keeps California, I think, certainly the most influential and important of the blue states. And then you have certain sectors of the workforce that have tended to be unionized and probably will continue to be. Certainly large parts of the public sector, including education and public utilities, for example, will continue to be union. In Southern California, you see a relatively strong presence on the part of building trades, construction unions. So there's sectors and there's regions in which unions are going to continue to survive. The question really is whether or not unionization as a remedy for low wages, exploitation, non-benefited workers can actually start to spread into the huge parts of the American economy in which unions barely exist. And of course, that would be in finance. Most of the technical professions, unions, in the new technologies, unions barely exist. There's some vestiges of communication workers of America in some of the new platforms, but basically not. So yeah, unions will continue to exist in parts of transportation, utilities, um, exploration and extraction of minerals and fossil fuels, construction, but unions are practically nowhere to be found in retail. We have a little bit of an exception to that here in Southern California with the some of the legacy markets still being unionized, but mostly in the United States, retail is a completely non-union sector, and a lot of people enter the workforce, the entry level into the workforce in America. A lot of it is through retail, and if you walked into a Starbucks and said to Starbucks workers, "Hey, you all want to form a union?" They would go, "What do you mean?" They wouldn't have a clue, and the same thing would be true if you walked into In-N-Out Burger. They wouldn't, or you walked into Best Buy, they wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't know what you're talking about. There's no sense that unionization could extend to the vast parts of the retail economy or the fast food economy. And so you almost have to start over again.
Yeah, and I'm worried about the service sector, obviously, because as I mentioned before, those jobs can go away at the flip of a switch.
In Southern California, we have a pretty good presence in terms of the hospitality industry. So we have quite a few unionized hotel properties in Southern California. SEIU has done a good job in terms of reorganizing the janitorial workforce. So there are pieces of the service sector in which unions have shown some presence, but that would not be true in a majority of the states. In the majority of the states, you wouldn't find much concentration for hotel workers representation or building services representation. Just Southern California is, and California in general is sort of the model for kind of maintaining a labor movement with a heartbeat.
Our, our last guest of this webinar is Hugh Giordano. Hugh is an organizer for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, and our discussions would not be complete without the input of someone who's promoting union every day as his job. Hugh ran for office a couple of years ago, and the process was eye-opening, right?
It
Share
was.
with us some of the insights you gained from the political process and gauge for us the future of the labor movement.
Sure. Well, first off, Dan, I want to say congratulations on writing such a great book. You did a great job on the research, and you got a lot of different perspectives. And I think anybody that's interested in politics, period, and understanding how the working class is involved in that discussion should read your book. It was an excellent book. So you did a good job.
Thanks, Hugh. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Well, talking about labor and politics, it's such a deep discussion, right? We have, just within our rank and file, we have folks that vote against their own interest on a regular basis. So I guess the first part of labor and politics is getting labor back into politics and understanding that we're not part of a party, that we represent the working class, period. And it's finding those candidates that will not only espouse what's right for the folks that we represent, for the many different industries that we represent, but they have to understand the language and actually believe it. And I think you can tell the difference between a politician that believes in unionism and believes in what a collective bargaining agreement and all that comes with it brings to their communities or their districts or their state or just their nation as a whole. And I think it's time we get back to holding people accountable for their actions and stop, being so vote blue no matter who mindset. And I think that's starting to change, and which I'm happy to see, actually. I think there are a lot of young labor union members and also folks that are also on labor staff that you're seeing that dynamic change now. where you have these 20-year-olds and 30-year-old representatives or members speaking up for politicians such as Bernie Sanders, which is pretty cool, in my view, and I personally thought Bernie is a good candidate. There's lots of argument that that's a whole other debate. Some people are very staunch against a party, but they say he runs as Democrat, so he's a Democrat. I may have not agreed with everything, but I think Bernie was probably one of the best candidates they had in my adult career with the union.
Why do you think, excuse me a second, why do
Sure.
you think that labor did not get behind Bernie 100%, or at least in large numbers?
Sure. Well, the first and obvious thing is, unfortunately, a lot of not all locals and not all unions are this way, but it's a very top-down approach, not a bottom-up. And you see those differences when the members came to the meetings, and you saw the labor unions that had meetings and real discussions about who they want to endorse. It ended up going to Bernie Sanders. But when it was a top-down approach from the international unions, you saw that it was more of a play it safe, moderate, go with the safe bet type of endorsement. And I also think that there's people that run, unions that are conservative, unfortunately, then they don't realize how conservative they are. And they're scared of the word socialism and all that stuff, and they shouldn't have been. They should have. I mean, being a leader of whether it's a local or an international union, to me, is seeing through the clouds, seeing through the mist, and getting to what's important. And Bernie Sanders had the utmost, ultimate, best labor platform I have seen in a major Democratic candidate. I've not seen anything like it. Now, third-party candidates have had that platform for years, right? And on a federal level, I mean, he's always in it. He was an independent. He was a socialist. I mean, back and forth. But as a Democratic primary contestant for the United States of America, he had the best platform for labor, period. And not only that, the Workplace Democracy Act he supported came out immediately after the Employee Free Choice Act failed in 2008. So he's been on top of it. And again, I just think it's conservatism within the ranks and file too. I don't know why some leadership doesn't stand up against members that say, we're going to vote against our interests. You need to have those discussions with those folks. I'm not saying to demean them, but have a discussion about them. Well, all these other issues that you're voting for, but this is your job. This is your livelihood. This is what pays your bills. This is what allows you to take care of your family. This is what allows you to go on vacation. This is what allows you to put good food on the table and send your kids to the doctor. All those issues aren't important to you. And I don't know why labor leaders don't have those discussions with their members. Sometimes you have to make the hard choices. Sometimes you have to get booed, right? Sometimes you have to, but in the long run, you have to do the right thing. And that's what being a leader is. So I think on that side, there was some problems with, I'm not talking about any specific union in general, but I'm saying there's some problems with some unions with there being conservatism at the top. And I think the members, and I think that's the main issue. We need leadership. I mean, I think that I've in the short term, it's leadership at the top.
So what do you think about this love relationship between the Democratic Party and labor?
Well, the sad part about it is, and again, going back to what I guess some of the comments I made, is that the love relationship is dying out with the older generation. I don't think it's going to be that way. And that's why the Democrats should be jumping up and down for somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because she talks about labor unions. She talks about workers' rights. She fights against the big box, warehouses like Amazon already, and stood up against them. Where Bernie Sanders is feeding her that information. She agrees with it. And Bernie didn't win, but he won because he got a bunch of other people to say, you know what, I believe in that. I'm going to run for office. So he did a good job on that part. And I think he gets that. But, you know, I don't think it's going to be, unless there's people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other politicians that speak to labor, speak to workers, like Bernie Sanders does, then there won't be a love relationship. So they better hold on to people like that.
Sorry, I keep, the connection keeps dropping and then coming
It's
back.
okay.
Um,
It's okay.
as far as organizing goes, I guess I would consider UFCW's attempt to organize pot shops as thinking outside the box. Are there other ways that you think that unions should be doing that?
Oh, sure. So I think it's just having the foresight of knowing what industry is going to be here 30 years from now. You know, just because it's a hot company right now and it's a trend doesn't mean it's going to be there. So we have to look at the long term. So cannabis, 100%, it's going to be here forever. It was already here, but now it's going to be legalized, and once it's legalized, it's never going to leave. And I think just like alcohol and tobacco, there's going to be, whether you agree with the substances or not, that's another issue. But if it's here and there's going to be workers in those industries and they're working, then they should be treated with respect and dignity. And that's how we looked at it at cannabis. And that's why we jumped on cannabis immediately. But not only just to organize, we were politically involved. So, so one way that unions and the way we've been doing it, you said, you know, how can we branch out and get into different conversations and grow our base, right?
All right.
Well, within cannabis, we've been able to talk to the patient base, right? So the patient base has all these issues that affect them, right? So whether it's the quality of their medicine, the cost of their medicine, how they're able to get their medicine, you know, so this is a conversation about working class issues, right? It's not covered by insurance, so it comes out of pocket. So if you have stage 4 cancer and both of your significant other, or you're alone and you're a senior citizen, you have to drive, you know, good a distance to get your medicine, and then you have to pay for it out of pocket, and let's pay for gas and everything else. I mean, how can poor people afford that? So we've been part of that conversation too for patients' rights. And just like, but there's other, you have civil rights issues with cannabis, right? So when we're talking about the issues that affect African Americans, cannabis has been part of that conversation for a long time too, because it was an easy way for officials to arrest, prosecute, and destroy somebody's life on a simple cannabis charge. So expungement and making sure that social equity goes back into that industry where people of color, women, immigrants have the right to open up small business and get into the industry, and folks that were hit with charges for non-violent, you know, self-use cannabis charges, simple having, you know, less than an ounce on you type of thing, and you're in jail for 20 years. I mean, it's disgusting. Those people's lives have been ruined over something so stupid, but now rich people are making millions and millions of dollars off of it. And they're playing Wall Street money with it. So just like, so there's so much into that.
And there's so much of that, I mean, the politicians have gotten kind of used to it too now, because they're able to do more at the legislative level.
Agreed. And I think, you know, that's where, you know, the state level is where a lot can get done. You know, let's look, for example, Oregon, right? Oregon has a law that, you know, I had thought about when I ran for office, but I didn't realize it was enacted in Oregon. And I'm on top of labor, and that's a shame, because we should know that they have a law in Oregon where you can't force workers into anti-union meetings, right? It's a choice. You can't make them go into the meeting, or that would be a huge law that we could pass on every state level to give workers more freedom to choose a union. Because what's the biggest problem during an organizing campaign? It's the anti-union tactics, the threats, the lawyers, the consultants, the pizza parties. I mean, that's what it is. That's what kills it. And it's a shame.
Yeah, my congressman happens to be trying to get rid of the clause in the Taft-Hartley Act that allows for a right to work. He wants to outlaw it completely.
Good. And that's another. That's another topic, right to work. That's just a defundment of the union. It has nothing to do with freedom to work, freedom to pick a job. It's just defund labor so that we can't do our job. That's all it is. It's that simple.
Exactly. I'm sorry if I got you off track of what you're talking about as far as politics go.
Oh, sure, it's no problem. You can get us back on track. It's your interview. You there?
Yeah, this probably would have worked better if I'd used my phone. I can't believe
It's
how much
okay.
today's the worst. I don't know if it's
It's all right,
because more
Dave. Don't worry about it, man.
using the internet or what.
It's okay.
Excuse me. Sorry, but did you hear what did I get you off track when I threw in that question before?
Oh,
I know.
oh no. I mean, get us back on track to what you want. Yeah.
Okay, you were. I know that when you ran, you ran as a green, did you not?
Yes.
Okay, why did you make that decision?
Sure. So, getting there took years, actually. I remember being in college, and I had just read about Ralph Nader, and I knew who Ralph Nader was, but I didn't know him. But there were books, and I was reading about him, and I was like, this guy makes a lot of sense. So at the time, I'm still a Democrat, but I'm reading Ralph Nader, and I remember my first time I was able to vote. It was Al Gore versus Bush, and
Oh yes, 2000.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. John Kerry, and John Edwards. I apologize. No, I
Okay,
don't know. Was it Bush? No, it was Bush. It was 2000. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of. My dates are so messed up. But I remember watching the election, and I know my mind is so rumbled. But I remember watching the election. I was in college, and I started looking at the screen, and I'm like, how did Bush win? How did this guy win? And I couldn't believe it. And I started thinking about what Nader was writing and all the things of why and how things happen. I'm like, man, it really makes a lot of sense. It really makes a lot of sense what this guy's saying, like the way, like, because when Bush won again, because yeah, it was his second term, because I couldn't believe he won. Because I'm like, this guy's has us in a war. We know he's lying about it, and he still won. And I'm like, how does this happen? And then at the time, I also liked Mike Gravel. I thought Mike Gravel was from Alaska, U.S. Senator. I thought he was awesome. I saw him on the debate stage, and I said, I like that would be me, And so I started I started reading about what Mike Gravel's platforms were, Ralph Nader. I started just reading about other parties and learning more about like the Green Party, the Libertarian Party. And I did go to a Libertarian meeting to see, because I read about it and I was like, it's not really my style as far as the economic part of it. The civil liberty stuff was excellent, but the economics was a no for me. So I went and spoke to them, and I didn't think I was going to be good. So then I went to a Green Party meeting to see what they were like, and to see what I was reading, if it was accurate about how they, felt about certain things. Because I wanted to run for office, and I wanted to not run as a Democrat at that point. I knew from that election when I was in college on that something was wrong. And as I kept reading and reading over the years, I said, you know what? Once I get my graduate degree, I'm going to do it automatically. I'm just going to run. And I set my base. It was a years out plan for me personally to get to there to where I could decide to run. And once I did, I decided to run with the Greens. And it was a great choice. It was a great choice. The Green Party overall, even though they have their issues like every other party does, no doubt, they do. They're a small party, but that's why, again, running for office too kind of opened my eyes up to voters' rights. Not just candidates' rights, but voters' rights, like open primaries and instant runoff voting. and just bullying tactics of how much a party has control over the election process and how much they can shut down things from getting out of the darkness of the bad things that they do.
We've seen that, haven't we?
It's oh yeah. So so I guess just seeing, like, being honest and reading and not just see, the problem is a lot of it is true that the media and the way that the marketing is done, they're really good at just getting you to be whatever they want you to be. And the Democratic Party, jumps on their coattails and pushes the same agenda, or the Republican Party pushes the agenda. And then you're just in that lane and you don't see anything else and you can't talk to nobody else because everybody else, if you believe in this, then you're this and you're that, and it's over, right? And they've totally destroyed conversation. And it's a shame. They have so much power to do so much good. Both the political arena, the marketing and media and arenas, consultants, but they are all there to make money because it's like a soap opera. And that's what it is. But some states are making some differences, right? Maine has instant runoff voting now. You have a bunch of states that are going to open primaries. So I think that's why you're seeing these young, different people winning, because things are changing, and it has to happen at the state level. Like I think open primaries and instant runoff voting should be in every state, and ballot initiatives too, direct democracy. That's another one.
Yeah, I've
Let
actually
people be.
been a delegate to the state Democratic Party, excuse me, for about 9 years now. Maybe not that long, more like 6, I guess.
Okay.
And one of the things I was able to get passed was a resolution in favor of instant runoff voting. But it's amazing how in a solidly blue state like California, where all your state elected officials are Democrats, how hard it is to get any kind of progressive legislation passed.
Sure. Because I guess the reason, Dan, for that is, they'll pass. Oh, you want us to open pot shops? Sure. You want to decriminalize magic mushrooms? Yeah, no problem. Oh, you want to pass something that's going to affect my job? No. Right? That's what it comes down to. I mean, it's that simple. Open primaries, instant runoff voting, ballot initiatives, that stuff all attacks them. It makes them weak and takes control away. And that's the opposite of what a republic is supposed to be, even, right? We're electing you to be our voice. You are supposed to be a parrot of us, period. If you can't do it, go get another job. It's that simple, right? If you ran for office, you made a choice to be the people's voice. And even if you disagree with some of the people to say, you still have to bring up their thoughts. I might disagree. Let's say I had a district and it was some conservatives there that came to the meetings, but they came out to the meeting, they voiced their opinion. I may not agree with what they say, but I'm still going to let them know some of my people feel this way in the district, but the overall folks feel this way. And that's what I'm going to push for. I'd be open and honest about it. And if I get elected, I get elected. But these folks, anything that takes away their power, period. And that's what it comes down to. That's a shame. Because instant runoff voting would be great. I would love instant runoff voting in every state. I think it would change the whole dynamic, and you would see more independents and libertarians and socialist alternatives and all those folks. You would see more of that elected. You really would, because it takes away the spoiler effect, which even the media pushes that, and I can't stand it.
And we're back.
All right.
Okay, so what does we've talked a little bit about what the union movement does wrong. What are we getting right?
Sure. You know what? That's right. And I'm glad you're bringing that up, because they do a lot of good things right, or at least they try to. The one thing that I'm proud of, especially with my union, UFCW, is we've been very active for immigrant rights, and we've been very active for marginalized groups, such as LGBTQ groups, people of color, women, So I do like that. I think there are, and even some of these trade unions who you would think are kind of like the ones that are conservative, they're even doing those things now. I think that's great. I think we do that stuff right because those issues do affect our membership, and they're part of the working class issues. And I think I'm glad that labor has been a part of that conversation. I think it's great that there's lots of labor unions on the local level that are very much involved in their communities, doing food banks, helping people be able to write and read, speak a second language if you come from this country, where we have classes for free where the union sponsors that. Senior discounts for our members that retire still, make sure that they're okay and so getting the benefits they need. So we do a lot of good. That's the problem. We do a lot of good, but the few things that we do bad really hold us back, though. See, that's the issue. We do a lot of great stuff. We really do. But the few things that we need to be hardball on mess us up. We could be light years ahead of ourselves right now, I believe. But that it is what it is. I believe in what I do. I love what I do, actually. It's my career, but it's a hobby too. So I'm never tired of doing it. I have no problem, working Saturdays and Sundays because I love it. I really do love it. And I plan on staying in the fight. I plan on being part of the conversation. And hopefully we can get some more things changed and keep on going. And, guys like you matter, Dan. Guys like you who are out there talking, speaking it up. And you wrote a book about all these issues that I think everybody should read. So I hope every labor leader reads that book. That would be awesome. I hope every international president reads your book. We there?
Sorry, we're back again.
It's okay, Dan.
Anyway,
Hey, just so you know, Dan, and just so you know, Dan, I'm always open to anytime doing another one with you as well.
thanks.
Anytime. So don't worry about this one, okay? It happened. It is what it is. We all have. Hey, major media is having problems doing their stuff too. So don't worry about it.
That's true. But I was juggling 3 new technologies to me. They were new.
You'll get the hang of it. Don't worry.
Yeah, eventually, but hopefully sooner than later. But I appreciate your time, Hugh, and your insights, and I think the labor movement is in good hands if there's people like you around. What we're going to do with this information from these last 3 days is I will put together a report that I will share with labor councils, unions, and locals who want to see it. I'm also going to use it as a jumping off point to explore other issues that threaten the stability of the middle class and working classes. In my book, Capitalism Killed the Middle Class, I explored the gig economy, universal basic income, our criminal injustice system, education, healthcare, and much more. Now with the murder of Black men coming to some kind of flashpoint and a worldwide disease that has decimated job security, undermined company sustainability, and hurt so many people, we need to think of innovative solutions. It's time for my Unrig the System 5-day challenge. For just $27, you will become part of my think tank as we consider life after the coronavirus.